Tyrus Winkle had evaluated over 4,000 species in his 300 years of service, and not one of them had ever made his hands shake. He sat alone in his office aboard the Concord station, a massive ring of metal and light that floated in the empty space between three star systems. His office was small, quiet, and filled with the soft glow of holographic screens. On each screen was data, numbers, charts, biological readings, cultural reports, the usual things the Office of Species Evaluation collected before the Galactic Concord made first contact with a new civilization. This particular file was labeled Candidate Species 4327, Homo sapiens Sol System Orion Arm. Tyrus had expected nothing interesting. The species lived on a single planet. They had not even left their own star system yet. Their fastest ships used chemical fuel, which was like watching someone try to cross an ocean by blowing on a leaf. By every standard the Concord used, they were primitive, young, unremarkable. He had planned to finish the report before lunch. That was 6 hours ago. Lunch sat cold and untouched on his desk. Tyrus had not moved from his chair. His four long, segmented fingers hovered over the screen, frozen in place. His compound eyes, usually calm and focused, were wide open in a way that his colleagues would have found disturbing. He was reading about human biology. It had started simply enough: height, weight, sensory capabilities, nothing special. Humans could not see in the dark like the Marathi could. They could not hear subsonic vibrations like the Voreth. Their sense of smell was average. At best, Tyrus had almost marked them down as unremarkable and moved on. Then he reached the section on endurance. Humans, the report explained, were persistent predators. They did not chase their prey and catch it in a quick burst of speed the way most predators in the galaxy did. Instead, they followed it. They walked after it for hours, sometimes for days. They tracked it across open land under a burning sun, and they simply did not stop. The prey would run, rest, run again, and grow weaker. Each time, the human would keep walking. Eventually, the prey would collapse from exhaustion, heat, or fear, and then the human would kill it. Tyrus had read the paragraph 3 times. No known sapient species in the Concord's records had evolved this way. Ambush predators, yes. Pack hunters, yes. Venomous species, yes. But a species that killed by simply refusing to stop following, that was something new, something deeply unsettling. He kept reading. Humans were omnivores. They ate plants, animals, fungi, and things that had been chemically altered by bacteria, a process they called fermentation. They consumed a molecule called capsaicin, which was a defensive chemical weapon produced by certain plants to prevent animals from eating them. Humans ate it on purpose. They put it on their food. They held competitions to see who could eat the most of it. The report noted that capsaicin activated pain receptors in the mouth and throat, and that humans were fully aware of this. They just did not care. Tyrus set down his data pad and stared at the wall. He picked it up again and opened the section on injury and recovery. Humans could break their bones and heal them. The bones would grow back together, sometimes stronger than before. They could lose entire limbs and survive. They could be cut, burned, and poisoned, and their bodies would fight to repair the damage. They had a chemical response called an adrenaline surge that activated when they were frightened or angry. This chemical made them faster, stronger, and partially resistant to pain. It flooded their system automatically, without any conscious control. They were, in a biological sense, self-upgrading combat units that activated a chemical rage mode when threatened. Tyrus closed the file. He opened it again. He closed it once more. Then he sent a message to his colleague. Evaluator Shane arrived 20 minutes later. She was a Voreth, a tall, elegant being made of layered crystalline structures that caught the light and scattered it into soft rainbows. In her 200 years of service, Shane had never once raised her voice, never shown surprise, and never left a meeting early. She was known across the station as the calmest person alive. She sat down across from Tyrus, folded her translucent hands on the desk, and said, "You look unwell." "Read this," Tyrus said, and pushed the holographic display toward her. Shane read in silence. She was a fast reader. Most Voreth were. Her crystalline face did not move, did not shift, did not betray a single emotion. As she scrolled through the biological data, then she reached the section on Earth itself. The planet was classified based on standard Concord metrics as a high-danger environment. It had extreme temperature shifts, active volcanic systems, earthquakes, hurricanes, and massive ocean storms. Its atmosphere contained a reactive gas called oxygen that in higher concentrations was literally explosive. 70% of the surface was covered in salt water filled with predators. The land was home to venomous insects, toxic plants, large carnivores, and microscopic organisms that could kill human in days. The Concord's danger scale for habitable worlds went from 1 to 10. Earth scored a 12. Shane stopped reading. Tyrus waited. He had known Shane for over a century. He had never once seen her pause like this. "The scale only goes to 10, she said quietly. "I know. This world should not produce sapient life. It should not produce life at all. It is a death trap wrapped in a thin layer of breathable air. I know. And they are the dominant species on this world." "Yes." Shane looked up from the screen. For the first time in Tyrus's long memory, there was something in her crystalline eyes that looked very much like fear. "They did not just survive this world," she said slowly. "They conquered it. Every predator, every disaster, every disease, they fought all of it, and they won." Tyrus nodded. "What is their threat index?" she asked. "I have not finished calculating it yet," Tyrus admitted. "I have only reviewed their biology and their planet. I have not even started on their history." Shane was quiet for a long time. The light passing through her crystal body flickered unevenly, which meant she was thinking very hard. "Tyrus," she said finally, "I think you should upgrade this file." "To what priority?" She looked at him, and for the first time in 200 years, her voice carried weight. "Existential." Tyrus stared at her. Then he turned to his console, entered his authorization code, and changed the file priority from routine to existential, a category reserved for species that posed a direct and immediate danger to the survival of the galactic Concord itself. He had never used that category before. In 300 years of evaluating species across the galaxy, he had never once believed it was necessary. He believed it now, and he had not even read their history. Yet, The senior evaluation panel had not been assembled in full for over 60 years. The last time all 7 chairs were filled, it was to discuss the Kareth Dominion's illegal expansion into neutral space. That had been considered a serious matter. This was worse. The 7 evaluators sat in a curved row, behind a long table made of dark stone. Holographic displays floated in the air. Before them, each one showing a different section of the human file. The room was dim, lit only by the blue glow of the screens and the faint light that passed through Shane's crystalline body. Tyrus Winkle stood at the front of the room. He had not slept. His usually neat uniform was slightly wrinkled, and his compound eyes had a dull, tired look that his colleagues had never seen before. We have reviewed their biology and their planet, he began. Today we review their history, specifically their relationship with organized violence. He touched a control and the first display changed. Humans, he said, do not simply fight to survive, they fight each other. They have done so for the entire length of their recorded history, which spans roughly 10,000 years. In that time they have fought an estimated 15,000 wars. The room was silent. 15,000, repeated evaluator Morath, the eldest member of the panel. He was a Drell Cathay, a massive, slow-moving being covered in thick gray plates. He was 900 years old and had seen more of the galaxy than anyone else in the room. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. Over what? Everything, Tyra said. Territory, resources, religion, political ideology, ethnic identity, trade routes, personal insults between leaders, and in some documented cases, reasons that their own historians cannot fully explain. He changed the display again. A map of Earth appeared, covered in red markers, each one representing a major conflict. I will focus on 2 events that I believe best represent what this species is capable of. The first event was a conflict they humans called the First World War. Tyra explained it carefully. 2 large alliances of nations had gone to war over a complex web of treaties and rivalries. Within months, the fighting had settled into a form that no species on the panel had ever encountered. They dug long channels into the ground. Tyra said, trenches, thousands of kilometers of them, and they lived in these trenches for years. The conditions were terrible: disease, flooding, constant bombardment. The space between the opposing trenches was called no man's land, and crossing it meant almost certain death. He paused. They crossed it anyway. Thousands of times, millions of soldiers died in these charges, often gaining less than a few hundred meters of ground, and when they were pushed back, they do it again the next day. Evaluator Shane's light flickered rapidly. During this same conflict, Tyrus continued, they developed chemical weapons, gases that burned the lungs, blinded the eyes, and dissolved the skin. They used these weapons on each other and the soldiers who survived the gas attacks, wrapped cloth around their faces, and kept fighting. Marath leaned forward. They poisoned each other and continued to engage in combat. Yes. Were they not aware that the gas was killing them? They were fully aware. They simply considered retreat to be a worse option than death. The room was very quiet. Tyrus moved to the second event. The humans called it the Second World War, it was larger, deadlier, and more widespread than the first. Tyrus did not go into the full details of the conflict. They would have been in that room for days. Instead, he focused on two specific developments. During this war, he said, human scientists successfully split the atom and used the resulting energy to build a weapon of extraordinary power. They called it an atomic bomb. He showed the panel an image from the human archives, a massive cloud of fire and smoke rising into the sky above a flattened city. They used this weapon on two populated cities. Approximately 200,000 humans died, most of them civilians. The panel stared at the image. None of them spoke. After the war ended, Tyrus continued, they did not stop building these weapons. They built thousands more. Two rival nations, the United States and the Soviet Union, each accumulated enough atomic weapons to destroy all life on their planet several times over. He let that sink in. And then he said, they pointed these weapons at each other and waited. Waited for what? Asked Evaluator Dren, a small feathered being from the Pell system, for the other side to attack first. Their strategy was called mutually assured destruction. The idea was simple. If one side launched its weapons, the other side would launch theirs in response. Both sides would be completely destroyed. Therefore, neither side would attack because doing so meant their own annihilation. Dren blinked several times. They maintained peace by threatening to end their own species. For approximately 40 years, yes. And it worked. It worked. Morith made a low sound deep in his chest, something between a growl and a sigh. This is not strategy, he said slowly. This is madness given structure. Tyrus nodded. There is more. He showed the panel data on human endurance chemicals, the adrenaline system he had already reviewed, but also cortisol, dopamine, and endorphins. He explained that human soldiers could continue operating for days without sleep, could fight through injuries that would incapacitate most species, and that their brains actually produced reward chemicals during high-stress combat situations. They are not just willing to fight, he said. Their bodies are designed to reward them for it. He then showed them something unexpected. Humans had taken wolves, one of the top predators on their planet, and over thousands of years turned them into loyal companions. They called them dogs. They had done the same thing with wild cats, horses, and birds of prey. And GT snorts. And GT. They had even learned to use microscopic organisms, bacteria and fungi, to produce food, medicine, and fuel. They do not simply kill threats, Tyrus said. They tame them. They take the most dangerous things in their environment and make those things work for them. The panel sat in silence for a long time. After Tyrus finished, it was Marath who spoke first. The old Drell Cathay was staring at the holographic display showing Earth still covered in red marks, still spinning slowly in the blue light. In 900 years, he said, I have studied over 1,000 species. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have watched civilizations destroy themselves and others. I have seen cruelty, brilliance, and everything in between. He looked around the room at his fellow evaluators. I have never seen anything like this. They have never known peace, not truly, not completely, and yet they have not destroyed themselves. They came close. Many times, but they did not. They kept going, they kept building, they kept reaching upward even as they tore each other apart. He turned his heavy gaze to Tyrus. "What are they?" he asked. Tyrus did not have an answer. None of them did. The question hung in the air, like smoke, and no one in that room, beings who had spent centuries studying the life of the galaxy, could find the right words, because the truth was simple and terrifying. Humanity was not a species that had learned to fight. Humanity was a species that had been forged by it. Every war, every disaster, every plague and famine, an ice age had not weakened them. It had sharpened them. They were a blade that had been folded 1,000 times, and they did not even know how sharp they had become. Morath looked back at the spinning image of Earth and said very quietly, "They have never known peace, and yet they thrive." No one disagreed. The high chamber of the Galactic Concord was the largest enclosed space ever built by any civilization in recorded history. It was a vast dome of white metal and living crystal, wide enough to hold a small city, tall enough that clouds sometimes formed near the ceiling. 12,000 seats rose in curved tiers around a central platform, and every seat was filled. Representatives from every member species of the Concord had come. Some were massive. The Drell-Cathai delegates filled their seats like boulders wedged into chairs. Some were small. The Pelori sat in clusters, their bright feathers catching the light. Some were barely visible. The Fenthai existed mostly as shifting patterns of energy flickering in their designated zones. They had all come for the same reason. The human file had been leaked. No one knew how. It did not matter. Within hours of the leak, every species in the Concord had read the report. Within days, the assembly had been called into emergency session. The mood in the chamber was tense, electric, and deeply afraid. Tyrus Vinkel stood on the central platform, alone under a circle of white light. He had never addressed the full assembly before. He had never expected to. His voice, amplified by the chamber systems, carried to every corner of the dome. The Office of Species Evaluation has completed its assessment of candidate species number 4327, known as Homo sapiens, native to the Sol system, he said. He kept his voice steady, though his hands trembled slightly at his sides. After a thorough review of their biology, their environment, their history, and their cultural development, we have assigned a threat index of 247. The chamber erupted. The threat index scale ran from 1 to 100. 1 was a species that posed no danger whatsoever, simple farmers or nomads with no weapons and no ambition. 100 was a species capable of threatening a major galactic power. Nothing had ever scored above 93. 247 was not supposed to be possible. The Speaker of the Assembly, a tall, thin Marathi named Consul Vera, called for order. It took several minutes. When the noise finally died down, Tyrus continued. "I understand the reaction," he said. "I had the same one, but the numbers are accurate. We have checked them 4 times. Humanity scores beyond our existing scale in multiple categories, including adaptive warfare, environmental resilience, innovation under pressure, and what we have termed cooperative aggression, the ability to form large, organized groups for the specific purpose of destroying a shared enemy. He stepped back, his part was done. What followed was the longest debate in the history of the Galactic Concord. 3 factions formed almost immediately. The first and largest was the Isolationist Bloc, led by the Marathi and the Vorath. Their position was simple and clean: build a quarantine zone around the Sol system. Block all travel in or out, cut all communication, let the humans live on their planet and hope they never developed faster than light travel. If they did, the quarantine could be upgraded to a full blockade. They are contained, said Consul Vera, speaking for the isolationists. They have one planet, they have no knowledge of our existence. The safest path is to ensure that never changes. The second faction was smaller but louder. The Kreth Dominion, a species of large, armored reptilians known for their military strength, led what quickly became known as the Preemptive Faction. Their position was even simpler. Destroy them, said Fleet Commander Rathek, the Kreth representative. He stood at his seat, his heavy tail swinging behind him. Destroy them now, while they are still on one world, while they are still burning fossil fuels and arguing among themselves. Every year we wait, they grow stronger. Every decade they advance further. If we allow them to reach the stars, we will not be able to stop them. No one will. The chamber murmured. Many agreed, though few wanted to say it out loud. The third faction was the smallest. It consisted of fewer than 100 species, most of them young civilizations or those known for unusual philosophies. They were led by an ambassador that most of the chamber had never heard of before. That day, her name was Ali Suncrest, and she was a Pelori, a small bird-like being with golden feathers and bright black eyes. She was young by galactic standards. Barely 60 years old, she had been an ambassador for only 12 of those years. She had no political power, no military backing, and no reason to be standing on the central platform of the most important assembly session in living memory. But she was standing there anyway. I have read the same file you have all. Read, she said. Her voice was light and clear, like a bell struck once in a quiet room. I have seen the wars, the weapons, the destruction. I understand the fear. It is reasonable. She paused and looked around the chamber. But you have only read half the file. She touched a control, and new data appeared on the chamber's displays. Not weapons, not wars. Music, art, literature, medicine, philosophy. Humans compose music that can make other humans weep, Ali said. They paint images of such beauty that other humans will travel thousands of kilometers just to stand in front of them. They write stories about love, loss, and hope, and they share those stories across every border and every language. She changed the display again. They build hospitals where the sick are treated regardless of their ability to pay. They have doctors who travel to disaster zones, places where the ground is shaking and buildings are falling, and they run toward the danger, not away from it. They do this for strangers, people they have never met, people they will never see again. She looked directly at Fleet Commander Rathek, the same species that split the atom and built weapons of mass destruction, also used atomic science to treat cancer, a disease that kills millions of their people every year. The same hands that forged swords also painted masterpieces. The same minds that designed trenches and poison gas also wrote symphonies and discovered the structure of their own genetic code. The chamber was silent. "You want to quarantine them," she said too. "The isolationists. You want to destroy them," she said too. "The preemptive faction, but I am asking you to consider a third option. Make contact, offer friendship, because the only thing more dangerous than having humanity as an enemy is choosing not to have them as an ally." Rathik made a harsh sound, the Kreth equivalent of a dismissive laugh. "You would gamble the safety of the galaxy on the kindness of a death world predator species. I would gamble the safety of the galaxy on the fact that they keep trying to be better," Ali said. "Against every instinct, against every pressure, against every war and plague and disaster they keep trying. That is not weakness, Commander, that is strength, the likes of which this chamber has never seen." The debate continued for 3 more days. Votes were called and failed. Arguments circled back on themselves. Alliances shifted by the hour. In the end, no faction achieved a clear majority. The conquered could not agree to quarantine, could not agree to destroy, and could not agree to contact. But behind the scenes, things were already moving. Alice received a quiet message from one of her intelligence contacts. The Kreth fleet, 300 warships with more being mobilized, was already moving toward the Sol system. Rathik had not waited for the vote. He had never intended to. The conquered's debate was to him nothing more than noise. He would handle the humans himself. Ali sat alone in her small quarters that night, staring at a star map. Sol system blinked faintly at the edge of the Orion arm, a tiny yellow dot. Impossibly far away, impossibly fragile. She made her decision. She pulled up the specifications for the fastest ship available at Concord Station, a small courier vessel designed for emergency diplomatic runs. It could reach the Sol system in approximately 30 days if she pushed the engines beyond their safety limits. She packed nothing. There was no time. She filed a falsified flight plan, slipped out of the station's diplomatic dock under a maintenance code, and pointed her ship toward a small yellow star on the edge of the galaxy. As the stars blurred into streaks of light around her, she whispered to herself, "I hope they are as compassionate as the data says, because I am about to bet my life on it." The ship jumped to faster than light speed, and Ali Suncrest disappeared into the dark between the stars. Behind her, the Crest fleet was already on its way. The object appeared on radar screens across the world at 3:47 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time on a Tuesday in March. It was decelerating. That was the first thing that told the scientists it was not a natural object. Asteroids and comets did not slow down as they approached the sun. This thing was braking carefully, deliberately. It was heading directly for Earth orbit. Within an hour, every major space agency on the planet had confirmed the readings. Within 2 hours, the news had leaked online. Within 4 hours, the streets of every major city were filled with people looking up at the sky, even though there was nothing to see yet. The United Nations called an emergency session. Governments that had not spoken to each other in years opened direct communication lines. Military forces around the world went to their highest alert levels. The world held its breath. The ship arrived in orbit 6 hours later. It was small, roughly the size of a city bus, and it was broadcasting a signal on every frequency. The signal was simple: repeating and clearly designed to be understood, mathematical sequences, prime numbers, basic geometric shapes, universal greeting. Dr. Lena Vasquez was the one who decoded it. She was a 42-year-old exolinguist from Mexico City, one of the world's leading experts in the theoretical framework of non-human communication. She had spent 20 years preparing for a moment that most of her colleagues believed would never come. Now it was here, and she was sitting in a conference room at the United Nations headquarters in New York, surrounded by military officers, diplomats, and scientists translating an alien signal on a laptop that kept crashing. "It is a greeting," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "And it is asking for permission to land." The world said yes. The ship landed in a secured field. Outside Geneva, a cordon of soldiers from 14 nations surrounded it. News helicopters circled overhead. 2 billion people watched the live feed. The alien that stepped out was small, barely 5 feet tall, covered in golden feathers with bright black eyes that looked around at the crowd of humans with what Lena would later describe as nervous curiosity. She moved like a bird, quick, careful, her head tilting slightly as she took in each new detail. She carried no weapons. She wore a simple uniform with a symbol on the chest that none of the humans recognized. She raised one hand, an open hand with thin, delicate fingers spread wide. Lena stepped forward. She had been chosen as the primary contact, partly because of her expertise, partly because she had volunteered, and partly because Colonel James Harker, the Marine officer in charge of security, had said, "Send the scientist first. If they wanted to kill us, they would not have knocked." Harker stood 20 m behind Lena with a rifle he had no intention of lowering. The alien spoke. Her voice was light and musical, and the device on her collar translated her words into English with a slight delay. "My name is Ali Suncrest. I am an ambassador of the Galactic Concord, governing body of 12,000 spacefaring civilizations. I have come alone without authorization, because I carry a warning that could not wait for politics." Lena looked back at Harker. He gave a small nod. She turned back to Ali's. "What warning?" "A fleet of warships belonging to a species called the Kreth Dominion is heading for your solar system. They will arrive in approximately 87 days. Their intention is to destroy all human life on this planet." The silence that followed was absolute. 2 billion people heard those words at the same time, and for a single moment, the entire planet went quiet. Then the world began to move. Alice had expected many possible reactions. She had prepared herself for panic, for denial, for paralysis, for despair. She had studied the human file carefully, and she knew they were capable of great fear and great foolishness. What she had not prepared for was what actually happened. Humanity did not panic. Humanity got angry. Within 48 hours, the United Nations Security Council had passed a unanimous resolution, the first in its history, declaring a state of planetary emergency. Every nation on Earth was placed under a unified defense command. Old enemies became instant allies. Countries that had been threatening each other with sanctions the week before were now sharing military intelligence, satellite data, and scientific research without hesitation. Within a week, factories that had been building cars and appliances were retooling to build weapons and defense systems. Universities opened their classified research programs. Scientists who had spent careers competing for the same grants were now working side by side in emergency laboratories, sleeping on cots and eating from shared kitchens. Aaliyah watched all of this with a growing sense of awe and deep unease. She shared what technology she could. Her ship systems were relatively basic. By galactic standards, she was an ambassador, not an engineer, but she gave the humans everything she had. Shield frequency algorithms, energy distribution models, basic, faster-than-light communication theory. She expected the humans to study this technology for months, perhaps years, before they understood it. They understood it in days. Human engineers working in shifts around the clock, fueled by caffeine and a cold, focused rage, reverse engineered her shield technology in 11 days. Within 3 weeks, they had built working prototypes. Within 5 weeks, they had improved the design, increasing its efficiency by 30% beyond the original specifications. Aaliyah sat in a lab at the European Space Agency and watched a team of human physicists argue about how to mount energy shields on existing naval vessels. They were loud, messy, and constantly interrupting each other. One of them was eating a sandwich with one hand and writing equations with the other. Another had not showered in what appeared to be several days. They were also, without question, the most brilliant engineers Alice had ever encountered. How are they doing this? She asked Lena, who had become her constant companion and translator. Lena smiled. We have a saying, necessity is the mother of invention. And anger? Alice asked. What is anger? The mother of. Lena's smile faded slightly. Everything else. By day 60, humanity had a functional orbital defense grid. Modified satellites carried railguns, simple magnetic accelerators that fired dense metal slugs at tremendous speed. They were crude by galactic standards, but they worked. Human nuclear warheads were fitted with guidance systems, adapted from Alice navigation technology, turning them into precision weapons capable of detonating at exact coordinates in space. By day 75, the first human-built hybrid spacecraft completed its test flight. It was ugly, a patchwork of human steel and alien-derived components bolted together with more determination than elegance. It shook during launch. It made sounds that no spacecraft should make, but it flew, and it fought, and its pilot, a former fighter jet captain from South Korea, landed it afterward with a grin that Alice would never forget. Colonel Harker oversaw the military preparations with a calm efficiency that Alice found both reassuring and slightly frightening. He never raised his voice. He never seemed rushed. He moved through the chaos like a man who had been waiting for this his entire life. One evening, as they stood on a balcony overlooking a launch facility where 3 more hybrid fighters were being assembled, Alice asked him the question she had been wanting to ask since she arrived. Are you afraid? Harker was quiet for a moment. He was a tall man with gray at his temples and lines around his eyes that spoke of years and places he would never talk about. He looked out at the fighters being built below, at the crews working through the night under floodlights, at the sparks flying from welding torches. Ma'am, he said, we have been killing each other for 10,000 years, you think. We are scared of someone else trying. Ailes did not answer. She was beginning to understand something about humanity that the evaluation file had missed. Entirely, the file had cataloged what humans were, their strength, their endurance, their capacity for violence. But it had failed to account for what they became when they were united against a common threat. Alone, humans were dangerous. Together, they were something the galaxy had never seen before. On day 87, long-range sensors detected the Kreth fleet dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system. 400 warships, the largest military force the Kreth had ever deployed outside their own territory. On the bridge of the Kreth flagship, Fleet Commander Rathek studied his sensor readings with growing confusion. His intelligence reports, gathered months ago, showed a primitive planet with chemical rockets and basic satellite networks. What his sensors were now showing him was something entirely different, an orbital defense grid bristling with weapons, a network of armed satellites in precise formation, dozens of small, fast ships moving into attack positions. His second-in-command looked at him with wide, uncertain eyes. Commander, she said, that was not there 87 days ago. Rathek stared at the readings for a long time, then very slowly he began to understand what he was looking at. He was looking at a species that had gone from 0 to war-ready in less than 3 months, and they were waiting for him. Fleet Commander Rathek gave the order to advance. He had 400 warships each, one carrying weapons that could turn a continent to glass. The humans had a collection of crude satellites and a handful of small ships held together with welding and stubbornness. By every calculation, the battle should have been over in minutes. The first railgun slug hit his vanguard destroyer at 17% of the speed of light. The Kreth had excellent shields. Their ships were armored with layers of composite plating that could absorb energy weapons, plasma bolts, and most forms of kinetic impact. They were not designed to absorb a 2-ton chunk of tungsten traveling at 50,000 km per second. The destroyer folded inward like a crushed can and exploded before Rathek could issue a new order. 6 more slugs hit 6 more ships, each one was a kill. The railgun satellites were firing in coordinated volleys, targeting specific points in the Kreth formation. Command ships, shield generators, communication relays. The humans were not firing blindly. They were picking the fleet apart with surgical precision. Return fire, Rathek ordered. All ships full offensive spread. The Kreth fleet opened fire. Energy beams and plasma torpedoes streaked toward Earth's orbital grid. Several satellites were hit and destroyed, but for each one that fell, the others adjusted their positions, closing gaps, redistributing fire arcs. The grid was not a fixed structure, it was a living network that adapted in real time. Then the human ships arrived. They came in fast and low, using the planet's gravity well to accelerate beyond what their engines alone could manage. There were 47 of them, tiny compared to the Kreth warships, barely larger than fighters. They were ugly, mismatched, and loud. Their engines screamed frequencies that Kreth sensors were not calibrated to filter, flooding tactical displays with noise. They were also incredibly, dangerously aggressive. Kreth military doctrine was built on formation warfare. Ships held position, maintained distance, and fired in coordinated patterns. It was disciplined, efficient, and predictable. The humans had no doctrine. They had instinct. The hybrid fighters dove into the Kreth formation like animals attacking a herd. They broke into small groups of 3 or 4, targeting individual warships from blind spots and weak angles. They moved with a speed and recklessness that the Kreth gunners could not track. When one human ship was hit and damaged, its pilot did not retreat. In 3 separate cases, damaged human ships accelerated directly into Kreth vessels, using their own craft as weapons. Rathik watched a human pilot ram his burning ship into a Kreth cruiser's engine array at full speed. The cruiser lost power and drifted out of formation. Helpless. "They are insane," his weapons officer whispered. Rathik did not disagree. The modified nuclear warheads came next, guided by the navigation systems Alizja provided. They detonated in precise patterns around the Kreth fleet, not aimed at individual ships but at the spaces between them. The explosions created expanding walls of radiation and electromagnetic energy that disrupted shield, blinded sensors, and herded the fleet into tighter and tighter groups. The humans were not just fighting, they were hunting. They were using the same logic their ancestors had used on the plains of their home world: cut the herd, separate the weak and close in. Rathik had commanded fleets for 40 years. He had fought 9 species across 6 conflicts. He had never encountered anything like this. The humans did not fight like soldiers. They fought like something older and more primal, like predators who had been doing this for a million years and had simply found new tools. 4 hours into the battle, Rathik had lost 160 ships. The humans had lost 29 of their 47 fighters, and a significant portion of their orbital grid was damaged or destroyed by raw numbers. The Kreth still had the advantage. By every other measure, they were losing. The turning point came when Colonel Harker launched the boarding operation. 23 Marines in modified spacesuits launched from a human cruiser that had maneuvered dangerously close to the Kreth flagship under the cover of a nuclear detonation. They crossed the gap between ships using nothing but compressed gas thrusters and their own nerve Kreth point defense systems shot down 4 of them. The other 19 reached the hull. They cut through the outer plating with plasma torches, breached the inner airlock with shape charges, and poured into the flagship's corridors in a wave of gunfire and controlled fury. The Kreth were larger than humans. Stronger, their hides were thick and naturally armored. In a fair fight, a single Kreth warrior should have been able to handle 2 or 3 humans with ease. It was not a fair fight. The Marines moved in coordinated teams, covering angles and clearing rooms with a speed born from centuries of refined close-quarters combat doctrine. They used flashbang grenades, devices designed to temporarily blind and disorient that the Kreth had never encountered. They exploited the ship's narrow corridors where the Kreth size became a disadvantage, and they fought with a ferocity that transcended training. Harker led the final breach onto the bridge. The door blew inward and he was the first one through. A Kreth officer swung at him with an armored fist. Harker ducked, drove the butt of his rifle into the officer's knee joint. One of the few weak points in Kreth anatomy that Allies had identified for them, and put 2 rounds into his chest as he fell. Rathik stood at the center of his own bridge, surrounded by fallen crew, and looked at the human standing before him. Harker was breathing hard. There was blood on his face, some of it his own, some of it not. His suit was torn in 3 places. One of his arms hung at an angle that suggested something was broken. He raised his rifle with his good arm and aimed it at Rathik's head. "Surrender," he said. Rathik looked at this small, bleeding, broken creature pointing a primitive weapon at him, and he understood something that his intelligence reports had never captured. The numbers had told him that humans were dangerous. Standing here, looking into Harker's eyes, he understood that dangerous was not the right word. These beings did not stop. They could not be frightened into retreat. They would fight with broken bones and burning ships in their bare hands if they had to, and they would keep fighting until they won, or until there was nothing left of them to fight with. "I surrender," Rathik said. The Battle of Saul lasted 6 hours and 11 minutes. The Kreth lost 173 ships. The remainder of the fleet, upon learning of Rathik's capture, withdrew from the system at maximum speed. Humanity lost 31 of its 47 fighters, 9 orbital platforms, and 1,412 soldiers, pilots, and crew. Every one of them was given a name. Every one of them was mourned. Ali stood beside Dr. Vasquez on the bridge of the human command vessel and watched the Kreth fleet disappear into faster than light travel. She was trembling, not from fear, from something she could not name. Something between awe and grief, and a deep, overwhelming respect. "You did it," she said softly. Vasquez looked at her with tired, red-rimmed eyes. "We always do," she said. "It just costs us every time." 3 months later, the recording of the Battle of Saul was broadcast to the full Galactic Concord Assembly. 12,000 species watched in silence as the tiny, patchwork human fleet tore apart. The most powerful military force the Kreth had ever assembled. They watched the railgun strikes, the fighter attacks, the nuclear herding patterns, and the boarding action. They watched Colonel Harker stand on a Kreth bridge with a broken arm and demand surrender. When the recording ended, the chamber was quiet for a very long time. Tyrus Wenzel stood on the central platform once more. He looked older, thinner. The last few months had aged him in ways that 3 centuries of service had not. "I stand before you today not to present a threat assessment," he said. "I stand before you to present humanity's formal application for membership in the Galactic Concord." He paused and looked around the chamber. "I have updated the file. The threat index remains at 247. But I have added an amendment." The display behind him lit up with a single line of text. "Threat index 247. As allies invaluable, as enemies extinction level. Recommendation: keep them happy." A ripple of sound moved through the chamber, not quite laughter, not quite fear, something in between. The vote was held. 11,863 species voted in favor of admitting humanity. 137 abstained. None voted against. Even the Kreth representative, a new ambassador who had replaced the disgraced Rathik, voted yes. No one wanted to be the species that said no to humanity. After the vote, Elder Moreth, 900 years old, the most experienced diplomat in the galaxy, walked slowly down from his seat and approached Dr. Vasquez, who stood at the edge of the platform beside Alice. He towered over her, his gray plates creaked as he moved, his ancient eyes looked down at her with an expression that she could not read. In 900 years, he said, his deep voice barely above a whisper, I have never been frightened of a species. I am frightened of yours. Vasquez held his gaze. But I am glad, he continued, deeply and profoundly glad that you are here. Vasquez smiled. She reached out, her hand palm open, fingers extended. Moreth stared at it. It is called a handshake, she said. It means we come in peace. Moreth looked at her hand for a long moment, then very carefully he wrapped his massive, plated fingers around hers. Yes, he said quietly, but you brought guns just in case. Vasquez grinned. Always. Moreth made a sound, low, rumbling. Warm. It might have been a laugh. It might have been something else. Whatever it was the first sound of its kind he had made in a very long time. Around them, the chamber was emptying. Species were filing out, talking in hushed voices, casting glances at the two humans and the small, golden-feathered alien who stood with them. The galaxy had changed today. Everyone knew it. No one was entirely sure what it meant. But one thing was certain. Humanity had stepped onto the galactic stage not as conquerors, not as victims, but as exactly what they had always been: stubborn, creative, compassionate, terrifying. A species that painted beauty with one hand and built weapons with the other. Species that wept for its dead and then stood up and kept fighting. A species that had crawled out of a death world, survived everything its own planet and its own nature could throw at it, and still, against all logic, against all odds, chose to reach for the stars with an open hand. The galaxy would never be the same, and nobody was brave enough to bet against them.